Look at your hand right now, whatever shade it is. Yeah, whether you are pale enough to be mistaken for a piece of printer paper or dark enough to absorb sunlight like a personal solar panel, that color is not random. It is not decorative. It is not some cosmetic afterthought your body settled on because it ran out of ideas. Your skin color is the result of a negotiation, a very long, very slow, very high-stakes negotiation between your ancestors and a star that has been burning at 5,500 degrees Celsius for 4.5 billion years. And the star, for the record, was absolutely not playing fair. Because here is what most people never stop to consider. Every single human being alive today, all 8 billion of us, traces their skin color back to the same starting point. Dark. Very dark. Around 300,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens first appeared in Africa, the entire species was dark-skinned. There were no pale people. There were no redheads. There were no freckles. Nobody was worried about SPF ratings, because nobody needed to be. Everybody matched. And that was not a coincidence, not some genetic accident, not a cosmic roll of the dice. That was a survival requirement, enforced by the most powerful nuclear reactor in the solar system. So the question is not really why some people are dark. That is the easy part. The real question, the one most people never think to ask, is why did some of us stop? What happened? What changed? And why did it change so recently that your great-great-great-grandparents might have been a completely different shade than you are right now? The answer involves vitamin D, cancer, folate, ice ages, ancient farmers who accidentally rewired their own evolution, and a surprisingly rude star that has been running the show for over 1 million years. And the evidence for this, once you see it, rewrites a story most of us thought was already settled. Here is something that does not get discussed enough. A lot of people treat skin like it is just packaging, like it is the bag your body came in, the wrapping that holds your organs together while you walk around ordering coffee and arguing with strangers on the internet. But your skin is not a bag. It is the largest organ in your entire body, weighing about 3.5 kilograms on an average adult, and it has a job. A complicated, contradictory, borderline impossible job. Your skin has to block ultraviolet radiation. That is priority number 1. UV light from the sun smashes into your DNA, triggers mutations, and over time can cause cancer. But more immediately, more urgently, UV destroys something called folate. Folate is a B vitamin your body depends on for DNA repair, for cell division, for building healthy sperm. And most critically, folate is what closes the neural tube during the first 4 weeks of pregnancy. Without enough of it, you get devastating birth defects like spina bifida. So if your skin lets too much UV through, your folate supply gets wrecked, your reproductive fitness drops, and natural selection takes notice. Natural selection always takes notice. But here is the contradiction that makes this whole story possible. Your skin also has to let some UV in. Because UVB radiation, a specific wavelength sitting between about 290 and 315 nanometers, is the only thing that triggers vitamin D production in your skin. And you need vitamin D, badly. It controls calcium absorption, keeps your bones mineralized and rigid, and runs critical pathways in your immune system. Without it, children develop rickets, their leg bones bowing under their own weight. Adults develop osteomalacia, which is a polite medical term for your skeleton slowly softening until it can no longer hold you upright. Your skin needs to block the sun to protect folate. Your skin needs to absorb the sun to make vitamin D. And the balance between those two contradictory jobs depends entirely on one variable: where on this planet your ancestors happened to live. How much sunlight hit the ground beneath their feet. This is the trade-off that built every shade of human skin on Earth. And the person who mapped it most precisely, a biological anthropologist named Nina Jablonski, put it this way: skin everywhere is a compromise, dark enough to prevent sunlight from destroying folate, but light enough to foster the production of vitamin D. That is not poetry. That is a formula, and your body is still running it. Let's go back to the beginning. Roughly 1.2 million years ago, our ancestors were losing their body hair. Not because of fashion, not because of some aesthetic preference, because of physics. Early humans in Africa were becoming endurance hunters, running prey to exhaustion under the equatorial sun, and a fur coat during a 5-hour chase across the savannah was a thermal disaster. Sweating through bare skin was the engineering solution. But the moment you strip the fur off a primate and expose that naked skin to tropical UV, you have a very serious problem. That problem's solution was melanin, specifically eumelanin, the brown-black pigment produced by cells called melanocytes sitting in the base layer of your skin. Here is what you need to understand about eumelanin. It is extraordinary. It absorbs somewhere between 50 and 75% of incoming UV radiation. It scavenges free radicals, the molecular shrapnel UV creates when it smashes into living tissue. It sits inside tiny organelles called melanosomes that get transferred into surrounding skin cells, where they form protective caps directly over the cell nuclei, like tiny molecular umbrellas shielding the most important part of the cell, the DNA. And unlike the chemical sunscreen you buy in a tube and inevitably forget to reapply after swimming, eumelanin does not wash off, does not expire, and has been in continuous production for over 1 million years. The cosmetics industry wishes it could build something half this good. We know dark skin was locked in place early because of a gene called MC1R. In African populations, this gene shows almost zero functional variation. That is deeply unusual for any gene. Geneticists call it purifying selection. It means that for over 1 million years, every single mutation that tried to lighten the skin was eliminated. Not slowly, not politely, ruthlessly. The equatorial sun did not negotiate. If your MC1R mutated and let too much UV through, you did not reproduce. Your lighter skin variant died with you. That is not luck. That is not drift. That is engineering on a timescale we can barely comprehend. Now, here is where it gets interesting. Dark skin was perfect for Africa. Equatorial UV is intense, consistent, punishing, year-round. But around 70,000 years ago, some humans started walking north, into the Middle East, across Central Asia, up into Europe. And the further north they went, the weaker the sunlight became. At high latitudes, UVB radiation drops off dramatically. In Britain, in Scandinavia, in northern Germany, there are entire months during winter when the UV index essentially hits 0. You could stand outside completely naked from dawn to dusk in a November rain in what is now Denmark, and your skin would not synthesize a single useful microgram of vitamin D. Not one. For dark-skinned humans arriving at these latitudes for the first time, the situation was a slow-motion biological crisis that nobody understood was happening. Their melanin, the thing that had kept their ancestors alive for over 1 million years, was now blocking the tiny scraps of UV they desperately needed. Their bones began weakening. Their immune system started faltering. Women struggled with pregnancies. Children developed rickets, their growing bones bending and warping under their own weight because they could not absorb enough calcium. And every generation that stayed was a generation under pressure. And so natural selection reversed course. For the first time in over 1 million years, mutations that reduced melanin production stopped being lethal and started being advantageous. Not because lighter skin was better in some absolute sense. It was not. It was worse in almost every measurable way. More vulnerable to cancer, more prone to sunburn, less effective at protecting folate stores. But at 55 degrees north latitude, with weak winter sun and short summer days, making enough vitamin D to keep your skeleton intact and your immune system functional became the more pressing problem. And lighter skin solved it. This was not a decision anyone made. It was not fast. It was not dramatic. It was thousands of generations of tiny incremental changes, each generation slightly lighter than the last, each one a fraction better at pulling vitamin D from the pale northern sky. Natural selection is basically a very slow, very ruthless optimization algorithm. It does not care about aesthetics. It does not care about culture or identity or how you feel about any of this. It cares about one binary question. Did you survive long enough to have children? Yes, your genes move forward. No, they do not. That is the entire program. There is another angle to this story that most people have never considered: the genetics. Because if you assume that light skin evolved once, in one population, and then spread outward, you would be wrong. It evolved at least twice, independently, on different continents, using completely different genes. In Europeans, the two biggest genetic players are called SLC24A5 and SLC45A2. The first one carries a single mutation, a single amino acid swap, that accounts for roughly 25 to 38% of the skin color difference between Europeans and West Africans. One gene, one mutation, nearly 40% of the difference. That is an absurd amount of phenotypic change from a single genetic event. The derived version of this allele is found in virtually 100% of Europeans today. In East Asians, the lightening happened through an entirely different genetic pathway. A variant in a gene called OCA2, specifically a mutation called HIs615RRG, which is essentially absent in both European and African populations. This is a remarkable finding. It means that European light skin and East Asian light skin are not the same adaptation shared between cousins who walked out of Africa together. They are completely parallel, completely independent solutions to the same physics problem. Two populations separated by thousands of kilometers and tens of thousands of years. Two separate continents, two entirely different sets of mutations, both arriving at lighter skin because the UV environment at high latitudes demanded it. Biologists call this convergent evolution, the same way that bat wings and bird wings are separate inventions of flight. And it is happening right here in our own species, in our own recent traceable history. The sun posed the same question on two sides of the world, and human DNA answered it, twice, differently, correctly both times. And here is the part that should genuinely recalibrate how you think about this topic. These mutations are recent. The SLC24A5 light skin variant traces back to roughly 22,000 to 28,000 years ago. That sounds ancient, but in evolutionary terms, it is yesterday afternoon. And even after the mutation existed, it did not become common in Europe for thousands of years. It was largely carried into Europe by Neolithic farmers migrating from the Middle East about 8,000 years ago. If you've made it this far, you're clearly into this. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Anyway, here is something that rarely comes up in this conversation. In 2018, researchers at the Natural History Museum in London and University College London published a DNA analysis of Cheddar Man, the oldest near-complete human skeleton ever found in Britain. He lived roughly 10,000 years ago, and his genome revealed something that made headlines around the world. Cheddar Man had dark to dark brown skin and blue eyes. That combination sounds impossible to us now. Dark skin, blue eyes, living in a limestone cave in southern England 10,000 years ago, eating deer and hazelnuts. But it was not unusual. It was the norm across the continent. Hunter-gatherer populations from this same period across Spain, Luxembourg, and Hungary show the exact same pattern. Dark skin, light eyes. The gene variant responsible for blue eyes, sitting on a region called HERC2, had already spread through European hunter-gatherer populations long before any of the light-skin genes did. Pale eyes arrived first. Pale skin came much, much later. The idea that ancient Europeans always looked like modern Northern Europeans is simply wrong. It is a story we assumed was true, and then the DNA proved otherwise. And later means later than almost anyone expects. A 2025 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences analyzed 348 ancient genomes from across Europe and reached a conclusion that rewrites the standard timeline. Most Europeans remain dark-skinned or intermediate-skinned well into the Bronze Age. Light skin only reached parity with dark skin in Europe during the Iron Age. Roughly 3,000 years ago. 3,000, not 30,000, not 300,000. If you are of European descent, your ancestors were likely darker than you are for almost all of recorded human history. The people who built Stonehenge probably did not look like the people living next to it today. So what finally pushed the change? What accelerated depigmentation in the last few thousand years? The answer is not sunlight. The sunlight had been weak for tens of thousands of years. The answer is food. When humans shifted from hunting and gathering to agriculture roughly 10,000 years ago, their diet transformed completely. Hunter-gatherers ate fish, red meat, organ meats, wild game, all excellent dietary sources of vitamin D. They were getting the vitamin from their food, which partially compensated for the weak northern sun. Farmers ate grain, wheat, barley, millet, oats, almost zero vitamin D content. They went from a diet that supplemented what their skin could not make to a diet that provided essentially nothing. That single shift made early European farmers dramatically more dependent on their skin, and only their skin, to synthesize vitamin D from whatever sunlight was available. And that dependency cranked the selective pressure for lighter skin higher than it had ever been in the history of the species. The farming revolution did not just change what humans ate. It changed what humans looked like. It changed the color of an entire continent's population within a few thousand years, which in evolutionary terms is essentially a panic response. Let's take a step back and look at the full picture, because there is one population that breaks this entire model wide open. And understanding why they break it confirms everything we have been talking about. The Inuit and other indigenous Arctic peoples live at some of the highest latitudes on Earth. Extreme cold, months of near total winter darkness, UV levels so low they make northern Scotland look like a beach resort. By every prediction of the vitamin D hypothesis, these populations should have evolved the lightest skin on the planet. They should be translucent. They are not. Inuit skin is notably darker than European skin at comparable or even lower latitudes. The reason is elegantly simple. Traditional Inuit diets are built almost entirely around fatty fish, seal blubber, whale meat, and Arctic char, all of which are loaded with vitamin D. A single serving of raw seal liver contains more vitamin D than most Europeans get in a week. The Inuit solved the vitamin D problem not through their skin, but through their stomach. They ate their way out of the evolutionary trap. And because their food provided everything their bones and immune systems needed, the selective pressure to lose melanin simply never arrived. Their skin stayed darker because there was no biological reason for it to change. On top of that, the Arctic environment has its own UV quirks. Snow and ice reflect substantial amounts of ultraviolet radiation back upward, meaning that even at extreme latitudes, the Inuit face enough ambient UV that some degree of melanin protection remains useful. Snow blindness is not a metaphor. It is a real UV injury. This is the exception that proves the entire rule. Skin color is not dictated by latitude alone. It is dictated by the interaction between UV exposure, dietary vitamin D, and reproductive survival. Change any one of those three variables, and you change the outcome. The Inuit changed the diet variable. European farmers changed it in the opposite direction, and both populations ended up exactly where the model predicts they should. So what does all of this actually tell us? It tells us that skin color is not a fixed, permanent feature of any population. It is not a marker of deep ancestry. It is not a biological category that tells you anything meaningful about the person wearing it. It is a thermostat, a living, breathing calibration tool that your body adjusts across generations to match the specific combination of sunlight and diet available in the place where your ancestors raised their children. We have spent centuries building entire systems of classification, hierarchy, and identity around this one trait. And yet the science tells us it is among the most superficial, most recent, most environmentally responsive features a human body has. It changes. It has always changed. It will continue to change. Populations that move to new latitudes will, over enough generations, shift again. We know this because it has already happened, multiple times, independently, across the species. The darkest skin on Earth is over 1 million years old, refined by relentless equatorial sunlight into one of the most effective biological defenses ever produced by any species. The lightest skin on Earth is, by comparison, brand new, a workaround, an emergency patch applied when humans walked into places where the sun barely showed up, and then compounded dramatically when they adopted grain-based diets that stripped the last dietary safety net away. Neither version is superior. Neither is the default. Dark skin is the ancestral state, yes, but light skin is not a deviation from some master plan. There was no master plan. There was only the sun, the latitude, the food on the table, and the question of whether your children would be born with intact spines and working immune systems. Everything else, everything, is just the story we told ourselves afterwards. And today, in a world where people move freely between latitudes, the mismatch is everywhere. Dark-skinned populations living in northern cities show dramatically higher rates of vitamin D deficiency. Light-skinned populations living near the equator show dramatically higher rates of skin cancer. Both are the same phenomenon. A body calibrated for one sun, living under another. Which brings me back to you, right now. Look at your hands. Turn them over. Whatever shade you see, you are looking at a letter from your ancestors. A biological postcard written by every generation that came before you. Each one calibrated, without knowing it, to the exact patch of sky they lived and died under. If your skin is dark, you are carrying the oldest continuous adaptation in the human species. More than 1 million years of unbroken engineering, encoded into every melanocyte in your body, passed down without interruption since before Homo sapiens even existed as a species. If your skin is light, you are carrying evidence of one of the most dramatic evolutionary pivots in human history. A shift so recent and so rapid that the builders of Stonehenge may not have shared it with you yet. And if your skin is somewhere in between, which statistically most humans on Earth are, you are living proof that this negotiation is not finished. It was never finished. It will never be finished. Your body is still talking to the sun, and the sun is still answering. Every morning, when light hits your skin, a transaction takes place. UV photons arrive. Melanin responds. Vitamin D is synthesized, or it is not. Folate is protected, or it is not. The same trade-off that shaped your ancestors 100,000 years ago is running inside your cells right now, this second, while you watch this video. You are not separate from this story. You are the latest draft. And what about you? Did anything in this video change how you think about skin color or about your own? Let me know in the comments. Until then, see you soon.